Welcome to the Farming on Purpose podcast, a podcast for farmers and ranchers ready to shift for a stronger future. Today's challenges in agriculture are new, but the grit and determination required to be successful are not. On the Farming on Purpose podcast, you'll hear how producers of all sizes and practices are moving mountains for things they believe in, all in the name of an industry that keeps growing and innovating for a stronger food system and stronger farm families. I'm your host, Lexi Wright, and I'm excited to discuss where producers are finding success, challenging the status quo, striving for better, and keeping our heritage alive, all while producing the food we depend on. Welcome back to Farming on Purpose. Today I'm here with Macey Hurst, and Macey and I have been trying to figure out a time to make this work for quite a while now. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and hear about her story and share it with you guys. She is raising registered Black Angus cattle with her mom and sister under the name Lady Livestock Co., which I think is just so special to get to do business with family that way. So Macey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in agriculture and how that all unfolded to this point?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm glad we finally get to do this. And thank you for your patience as we worked out our schedules. But I'm Macey. I live in Jeff City, Missouri. I'm from originally just a few miles south of Jefferson City. I grew up in a town of about 200 people. And everyone I knew had cattle. My family was in the cattle business. You couldn't leave town without driving through somebody's ranch. And I knew from a pretty young age that something that I wanted was to be a part of it. And when I got to high school, of course, I got involved in FFA. I did the whole state officer experience, started doing some speaking, and went to college for ag business and ag communications, and really just trying to immerse myself in the industry. And like I said, everyone I knew had cattle, but I did not realize that you could have a career in agriculture off of the ranch as well. And so I was blessed to get to do both. And right now I am an account executive for a company called Modern Litho. We're a commercial printer. We print for lots of different breed associations and livestock groups. And I'm called the ag girl in the office. So I still get to work with farmers and ranchers all across the country in that capacity. And then we have Lady Livestock Company. So that started kind of out of the ashes of my parents' divorce. And my mom and my sister and I had a conversation about, looking around after what we had kind of known and loved, this cow-calf operation. We had about 400 head of mama cows growing up. And I started buying cattle when I was about 8. And so it's just something that we had always had. And then all of a sudden it was gone. And so we just kind of had a tough conversation about this is something we're really passionate about. And it's going to be a tough journey, but we want to keep going and keep doing this. And so we drove across the Midwest and we found a herd we believed in, and we bought the whole thing and kind of started all over again. So that's how Lady Livestock was born. And now, just like any family business, it's gone through lots of transitions, and we've added some family members. And I have a brother-in-law now, and I just got engaged. And so lots of different roles on the ranch, but it's been a blessing and a learning experience. And we're really grateful to get to do it.
That is awesome. I think I knew that you had been a state officer, but I wasn't sure if we crossed paths then. What do you remember? What year were you?
16, 17.
Okay. So I would not have, I would have been several years before you. So we probably didn't cross paths then. We probably just did the same circles. I was like, I feel like you look so familiar when we'd been talking over email, and then I saw your face. I was like, she looks so familiar. I don't know.
Yeah. But then you were in Kansas, I assume. So yeah. What years?
11, 12, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. 11 and 12. Nice. Yeah. So anyways, side street there. That's so cool to hear you share your story. And that's something that I really wanted to chat with you about today, is that kind of evolution of family that you mentioned. That is something that I think is just really difficult to tackle in agriculture. We hear about it from all sorts of different angles, whether it be divorce, adding family members, being a married in family member on an operation. It always seems to be a tricky bridge to walk. Do you want to share a little bit more about how that has kind of unfolded for you guys and what that looked like in the process versus what it looks like now?
Yeah, absolutely. It is hard doing business with family in general, regardless of, the transitionary phases or the industry that you're in or whatever. It's just tough because there's so many emotions tied to obviously the business, but also your personal relationships with, my mom and my sister in particular. And now that, I have a brother-in-law and a fiance, and everyone has opinions and everyone's tied to the ranch in different ways. And it's got so many benefits too. Like I spoke at an event a couple of weeks ago, and they asked kind of what has been revolutionary for your ranch, your operation. And one of the things, honestly, that's been kind of revolutionary for us was introducing new perspectives. I grew up ranching with my mom and my sister our entire lives. It was the three of us, and then, our additional family as well. But we all did the same things because we were learning from each other. And so there wasn't really any outside perspective. Well, my fiance grew up on a ranch in East Kansas, and he worked at feed yards most of his career. And so he comes into it and he sees things so differently than we do. And, one of the most dangerous things you can say on a farmer ranch is, well, we do it like this because that's how we've always done it. And so it's so tough to have to consider different opinions and to, identify who has the final say or whatever, but it can also be very positive and kind of energizing. But yeah, I think communication, just like in any relationship or business, communication is so crucial. And I think too, like written communication, because it's so easy, whether it's over the phone or, over text, even, it's so easy to misconstrue things when at the end of the day, like you're all working toward the same goal. So really having plan, communicating that plan, and being thorough about making sure that everyone's doing their part to fulfill it is a really important, but still really hard step. And then, yeah, of course, planning for the future on a farm or ranch, when there's land involved and legacy, a lot of times, it can once again get pretty emotional, but that's such an important thing because there's a stat about, the likelihood of a business continuing on 3 generations, and it's like incredibly low, the success rate with third generation business. And so it's so important to make sure that not only are we doing our parts in the present to make sure that the business is successful, but that we're doing things proactively to make sure that the generations after us can be successful. And I think in farming and ranching, that's so hard because, again, it's such a personal career. It's not that we do farming and ranching for a living. It's that we are farmers and ranchers. That's part of our entire existence. And we identify so closely with it that it's hard whenever the next generation is coming up to let go of those reins and say, you know what, this has been my responsibility for the last 50 years, but it's your turn to take over so that one day when I'm not here, you'll be fully prepared to do that. So yeah, again, it's just so many emotions and so many people involved that it makes it tough. But that's, when you truly love something like your farm and ranch, it's important to make those sacrifices and to bring those people into the conversation.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said, like, we are farmers and ranchers. It's an identity thing. It's not a job. It's a something that we completely embody with our entire life. And I think that's so interesting in agriculture because I haven't come across other industries that are like that. I haven't experienced seeing that in other people with how they feel about their jobs. When you bring the family aspect into it, it gets so challenging because when it is time to transition and that identity changes, that's when it gets really challenging, I feel like. And it can be both ways. The younger generation or whoever is taking over has some identity to assume there too, of like, well, maybe they were always the kid who, as you mentioned, it's hard to decide who gets the final say. And if they never had the final say before, and now all of a sudden they do have the final say, that can be a really big change and a big shift. Do any experiences stick out in your journey as your family has evolved over time that you were like, wow, this is like just something I will always remember, or something that we changed because of that experience or anything like that?
Yeah. So much of the creation of Lady Livestock Company was surrounding kind of learning how to do things not only on our own, but in our own way. Because in our previous situation, you know, having farmed and ranched with my dad and my brother and my dad's family, it was something that we were involved in. We went to the sale barn and, you know, we learned how to back up trailers and all of these things. But when it came to things like driving the tractor or castrating or dehorning or whatever that looked like, so many times those were considered jobs for the men. And so even having grown up on a ranch, I did not learn how to drive a tractor till I was well into my 20s, because that was just not a job that was considered for a female, much less a young female. And so there was such a big learning curve coming into a ranch that was owned by 3 females. And so it was first of all crucial that we surrounded ourselves with people who believed in us and would kind of help us through those processes. But also we had enough knowledge and experience, and my mom, you know, lots of credit to her, because she grew up around like horses, and they had a farm. I don't think they ever really had cattle, but she was, you know, she's also incredibly business savvy. And so she kind of immersed herself in that, and she had all of these skills and all this knowledge that, you know, really translated well to owning a ranch of her own. But there were so many things that, like I said, we weren't allowed to do. And so we had to kind of learn those things ourselves. And that's kind of where the whole like transitionary thing comes to mind for me, because, you know, God forbid something happens to like the head of the ranch, you know, and the next morning, everyone else on the ranch wakes up and goes, he never let me. I don't know how. And, you know, because that was his job or her job, and no one else was ever taught. And I think too, that kind of ties into the mental health at rural America conversation, because again, when we identify as farmers or ranchers and we're trying to carry on this legacy of the generations before us, but those generations never taught us how to do what they do on a daily basis, that's a lot of responsibility to, first of all, just learn all of that while keeping the day-to-day of a farm or ranch operating, and then also to carry that on, just like they kind of expect you to do, you know? So that's why it's just so important, I think, to make sure we're presenting other, you know, whether it's the younger generation on the farm or ranch, or maybe it's hired hands that really, really take responsibility or want some ownership, or, you know, it's people that have absolutely no experience in agriculture, but they think they want to have a career in agriculture. So important that we like welcome them in and we give them those opportunities so that our industry has a sustainable future in the hands of people who are capable and know what they're doing because they've been given the opportunity to do it.
Absolutely. And that skill gap there it can be huge. The number of things like that I think about that my husband does that if he were not here, that I would have no idea, like absolutely no ability to take his place on, it's staggering. Like the number of pieces of equipment that it takes to operate a farm, the number of like just handyman skills that he employs on a daily basis. It's a big deal. So getting started training on those things early can make a huge difference. And it is good that we're starting to see that shift in the industry of like, we're not just teaching young men those skills, but we're starting to teach young women those skills too. I think that's hard, and that's something that we have to do. But what's your experience been with learning on the farm, learning on the go? You mentioned like you didn't learn how to drive a tractor until you were in your 20s. What was that like?
It was kind of scary just because, you know, I'd seen it done so many times, but I never had the opportunity. I mean, I'd been driving an ATV since I was probably 4 or 5 years old, you know, and my parents would sit us in their lap and let us drive down the, you know, mile long gravel driveway, so that when the time came, like we were very competent drivers of regular vehicles. I just didn't have any experience driving a tractor. And still to this day, I mean, if we go to the farm and there's anybody else with me, I'm going to let them drive the tractor, because I have no confidence in that area, because, you know, when I learned how to do it, it had been so long. I'd missed so many opportunities already that I didn't get the chance really to build up that confidence. And I'm sure if I, you know, went out to the farm and drove the tractor every single day, then I would get to. And my fiance is really good about making me do it every once in a while. So I can build up that confidence eventually. But it's just, you know, I know people who are 10 years younger than me who have been driving a tractor for 5 years, and, they feel they could drive it every single day if they wanted to, just because they've been given that opportunity. And the same with, a lot of things, whether it's giving shots or cash trading or hauling a stock trailer or whatever that looks like. The more times we get to do it, the more comfortable we're going to be, the better we're going to be at it. And then the better we're going to be able to take on that responsibility fully someday and then teach the generation after us. So I don't think there's any harm to creating those opportunities for people. And again, maybe it's something that they do once and they're like, I hated that, I never want to drive a tractor again. Well, that's fine, as long as you have somebody who can, and just giving them the opportunity to try that, and maybe to try and fail, or maybe to try and try it again until they're good enough to where they're the ones doing it next time.
I agree. Did you have a good teacher when you did start learning those skills?
I think it was a little bit of try and fail for me, just because, obviously, like I said, my mom had really immersed herself in it. I think, when my parents initially got married, and it got to the point to where she was doing it by herself a lot of days, and she was, very much capable of doing that. And then coming into it, especially because, again, kind of the emotions of doing business with family, it's hard to be told or instructed what to do by someone you're that close to. And so another learning curve, but, I was lucky to I worked for the Missouri Beef Industry Council for a little bit, worked for Missouri Cattlemen's Association for a little bit. So I got to spend a lot of time with a lot of people who were really good at what they did. And, again, like my mom and sister being a couple of them, and we, even having come from the same ranch, we kind of had different perspectives on how things should be done or how we wanted them to be done, especially when it came to, like, we did direct to consumer beef for a little while, and I was in college for ag business marketing. And so, like, I had what I thought we needed to do. And my mom, coming from a business owner standpoint, had her ideas. And then my sister, she's young and hip, and she had lots of, ideas. And so I think we kind of got to learn from each other a lot. And then, again, just kind of surrounding yourself with, whether it's a vet or we've got a lot of really good local sale barn owners. My brother now being one of them, he just bought one of the local markets. And so kind of surrounding yourself with people who can pour into you. And, maybe if you don't know what you're doing, you can go to them and you can ask. Or if they, have an idea or can kind of keep an eye out for you, those people are really crucial to have, I think, really, again, and regardless of your industry, but in agriculture in particular, because it is such a community focused industry. And, a lot of times you're doing business with your friends and neighbors. And so building that network and strengthening that community is really important.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of great people in your circle, whether it's family or people from work or, producers or neighbors that you've added to your circle. What is the most valuable to you about those connections?
I think having kind of a safe space, if that's the right term, to go with questions. So, like growing up, especially being a young woman in agriculture, I remember times when I would go to ask somebody a question that I truly did not know, and they thought it was a silly question. And, when they treat it like that, it makes you feel ignorant, and then you don't want to ask questions again because of how that made you feel. Whereas, like, now my fiance, again, he's a great teacher when it comes to, things that he does differently than we do. And I know that I can have a stupid question, I can go to him and he can, he'll answer it and he'll walk me through it and he won't make me feel like an idiot. And so having people like that in your circle where you can say, hey, this might be a silly question, but, like, I truly need an answer, then I think those relationships go a long way. And I think that translates too to, I talk a lot about communicating producer to consumer, and that's the same thing. If a consumer comes to us and says, hey, like, I was asked one time, do cattle have live babies? Well, like, to somebody who grew up on a cattle ranch, you're like, well, yeah, like, what did you, but for someone who didn't grow up on a cattle ranch, they don't know. And so you can't come at them from the perspective of, you should know this, or they're not going to ask questions anymore. And they're just going to assume what they see on TV and on Google and all this scary stuff that is put out in the media about agriculture, they're just going to assume that's right because they know if they come to you and ask for clarification, you're going to make them feel like an idiot for it. So I just think kind of creating a non-judgmental space for people to ask questions is a really important kind of mission that we as producers, whether it's producer to producer or producer to consumer, should prioritize.
I think that's great advice. It's sometimes hard when you get faced with some of those questions because it's like, how have we come to this point as a society where we don't know this? But I mean, you got to just accept people as they come to you and try to do your best to shed the best light you can on your industry. But some of those questions you get are just challenging.
Yeah. And I think about that too. Like, that one came from a student out of St. Louis and they had never seen like a live cow before, which I think I'm 2 hours from St. Louis, and you drive any direction out of St. Louis, you're going to see it. But like some of them haven't had the opportunity to do that. And then, you see all the time about the percentage of adults that still think chocolate milk comes from brown cows. But like, if that's what they're reading and that's what they're seeing, and again, they don't have those connections with farmers and ranchers that they can ask, then, that's what they're going to believe. And I think too about I go to the doctor and I'm sure they think some of the questions I ask are ridiculous. It's probably like baseline knowledge for them, but that's not my expertise. That's not my background. And so I try to remember the same thing. It's not that I'm uneducated when I ask those questions. It's just that that's not my experience and I don't know the things that they know. And so that's something else I try to keep in mind whenever consumers are coming to us with questions. It's not that they're uneducated. They're not stupid. They just don't have the same experiences that we do. So they're genuinely trying to learn from us. And it's our responsibility to create the environment they can learn in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that a lot of us, we chose to be in agriculture and some of us chose to be in education, but a lot of us didn't. And then we get kind of stuck there just by nature of the situation. So yeah, it's kind of like a burden to carry for some people in agriculture, I feel like, but one that we can make such a difference in if we do commit and kind of learn some baseline skills and how to communicate about it.
Yeah, I think too, that's another place where having a good network really comes into handy, because if somebody comes to me and says like, hey, how do you feel about, the cattle industry's effect on the environment? That is not something I'm an expert in. But I can say, hey, I know somebody who, really knows a lot about that topic. I'd love to give you their number, their Instagram or whatever. And, if education or communicating about agriculture is not your thing, find people who it is their thing and you can pass it along and that way you're doing your part.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you could join us today. You can support the mission of the Farming on Purpose podcast and be part of the tribe dedicated to building ag legacies at farmingonpurpose.com/shop. You'll find apparel, office supplies, stickers, planners, and more, all inspired by the people living out ag legacies every day. What are some of the things that stick out to you as you guys have grown your business and kind of mastered this whole working together with family, bringing new family members in? What sticks out as some of the best lessons learned along the way?
Well, I think we're still well on our way to mastering, but thank you. Being authentic, I think, has really paid off for us, and not necessarily like directly in our business. I don't know that it's affected our bottom line, or maybe it has, particularly when we were kind of building relationships with customers at the direct to consumer thing. But people love to see people that they can relate to. When I was in school and I wore cowboy boots every day because I was like, if I don't, how are they going to know that I live on a farm? And it was something that I wanted people to know. They had to know that about me. And I, at the same time, was so self-conscious about the size of our ranch. Like I said, we had 450 head of mama cows. And I thought, well, that's not enough. That doesn't make us real ranchers. And then, I think the average herd size in Missouri is 36 head. And so it cracks me up that I felt like I had to fit this mold to make myself a real rancher, when right now, our story as Lady Livestock Company is having a bigger impact because we're authentic, like my mom and my sister and I, like, we wear makeup. We like, I love to shop. We get our hair done. We get our nails, like we're being ourselves. And we actually, Missouri Beef Industry Council brought one of the influencers they work with out to our ranch one time. And she was, I want to say, in her upper 20s, and she just moved here from Florida, and they were doing some recipe partnership with her, but she'd never been on a ranch. And so they brought her out, and she was like, this is not what I expected. And we were like, how so? And she's like, well, you guys sound really educated, and you have all your teeth, and like you're dressed up, you look very nice. And it was so funny that, we kind of got to, by being our true selves, break those expectations. And then the best part was we were exhausted, and we apologized that we were so exhausted. But the reason we were so tired is that we'd gotten home that morning at about 3:00 from a Jonas Brothers concert. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And so again, just being authentic and not changing yourself to fit this mold, I think has been hugely beneficial for us. And then at the same time, also doing that with our ranch. So, back when we had hundreds of head of cattle, I was self-conscious about the size of our ranch. Well, thanks to the drought last year, we're down to about 25 head of cows. And that's something that we're kind of in a stage of rebuilding, but also that's something that's really relatable because so many people had to sell so much of their herd because of the drought. And that's something that consumers need to know about, like that's a struggle that we're going through. And so being able to, instead of hiding behind the fact that like, oh, we're below average now, that's not something to be embarrassed about. That's just a very real thing that farmers and ranchers face. And by sharing those struggles, consumers can not only get to know us better as people, but also understand kind of the ebbs and flows of farming and ranching, where their food comes from.
I am so glad that you shared that because, for one, I hear that same thing of people thinking that they need to have more cattle to be able to be a rancher, in air quotes, at every level, whether they have 5 cows or, like you just said, 300, 400 cows. Like, it's just, I want to do a deep dive episode sometime into where that whole perception of like, well, I'm not a rancher unless I'm this big idea came from, because it is so permeated into the cattle industry. Like, I do not know where it came from, but sometime I'm going to do some research and find out, because it's just staggering how many people have that thought, especially as they get started in cattle. Yeah.
And I always kind of equate agriculture to like a big puzzle, and every piece of the puzzle is, a farm or ranch, and not one piece of the puzzle is more important or bigger or smaller depending on, your contributions. Like, there's every single piece is so important. And so whenever those of us who have 5, 10, 15, 20 head of cattle don't share our story, then the handful of farmers and ranchers that do have hundreds of head of cattle, that's the picture that we paint. And that's fine. Those people are just as important, but the people that also have 5, 10, 15 head are an important part of the picture too. And so that's why, again, part of the reason that I'm so passionate about us being authentic is to try to, empower other people to say, oh, well, if she only has 25 head of cows, I only have 5 head of cows, I want to talk about my cows too. And so I always say, maybe you hear me talk about it and you think, man, I can do a heck of a lot better sharing my story than that girl just did. Great. Or if you think, hey, my story's like hers, or my story's unique, I want to share mine too, that's also awesome. So yeah, I just encourage, don't let numbers or statistics or whatever inhibit you from sharing your story.
And when you think about how big some of those big cattle operations are, the fact that the average herd size in the U.S. is 36 means there are so many ranchers that are of that smaller size to balance out those really huge operations. So yeah, it'd be interesting to just learn more about that, like what makes a real rancher in someone's eyes thing. So I'm so glad that you were being very authentic about that. You mentioned that you guys had to reduce your herd size because of the drought. How has that impacted you guys from as a business? Have you had to change how you market? Have you had to change anything else?
It's definitely been a little bit tough just because obviously, like, our fixed costs are the same as they were when we had, 60 head of cattle, and now we have 25. And so from like an actual business cash flow standpoint, it's definitely tricky. We're going to have to rebuild here soon. But, with the market right now, it's a great market to be selling cattle, but it's not a good market, if you're trying to rebuild a herd. And so we're in that process, retaining lots of heifers and trying to kind of rebuild from our own genetics. And honestly, this is not something I really expected, but so many of our cows are original from that herd that we bought when we very first started Lady Livestock Company, that when we loaded those things up on the trailer, my fiance and I were the ones that loaded them up, and he took them in while I was supposed to go to work that day. And it hit me so hard that I took the day off because, it made me emotional. Like, those cows at the time were like a sign of hope for us. And it was, they were, our step into like our new normal and getting back to our passions and what we so loved. And they've been so good to us. And then, obviously them getting older and then not having the grass to get them through the summer, much less any hay to get them through the winter. It was tough to see them go. And so, yeah, I came home and I got ready for work and I drove to the end of the driveway and I turned around and I said, I can't do it today. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. But again, that's part of like what we as farmers and ranchers do. We put our hearts and souls into everything we do. And that's why we are farmers and ranchers. And so, yeah, it was tough, both just from like kind of a standpoint of having to make hard decisions and do things that we didn't want to do for not only the betterment of the land, but also the animals and the sustainability of the business.
Yeah, you're making me a little bit emotional just hearing you think about it. It's a big deal. And I think when you have, I don't want to say small because who's to judge how, a small herd versus a large herd size anyway. But when you have like a number of cows that you recognize consistently, personality traits, and like, them by their tag number or their name or whatever they go by on your farm. And then like, you just come to expect that behavior when you go out there to interact with them or work them or feed them or whatever. We've got one cow that I complained about her all summer or all winter. She's 904, and she would always stick her dang head in the back of the truck while I was trying to feed cubes. And we let the truck drive itself while we feed cubes. And so she'd stop it from rolling forward. And I'd always be cussing at her, like, get your head out of there. We got to keep going. And but now that it's summer and we're catching cows a lot more often, I like her a lot more because she's always the first one to come into the catch bin after those cubes. But yeah, people don't realize how close you get to cows when you kind of have them for a while and start to recognize their traits and who they are. Yeah. How they interact with the herd too. But yeah, the drought was hard. I think you mentioned a couple of things there, like the statistics wise of like, it's a good market to be selling, but not a good market to be buying in, and how that affects not only ranchers, but consumers as well is a huge thing because cattle numbers are low. We see that across the board. And even if we are trying to expand, it's really hard to because you can't buy in right now. So what are your thoughts on that as far as, kind of what the next steps are for the cattle industry? I know you're very involved. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I hear people all the time talk about how hard it is to get into the industry, especially from the outside, not coming from either a family farm or inheriting land or whatever that looks like. And that's obviously true. Like, land prices are, even looking back to like some land that my family bought when I was a kid, prices are 4, 5, 6 times what they were then. And so, my fiance and I are looking for land right now, and it's insane. And I cannot imagine somebody who maybe didn't grow up around that and decides that they want to get into that. That's pretty intimidating. And then, like you said, being in it already and kind of trying to have to make those purchasing decisions to stay in the business to make sure that, your business is solvent, and then to still have those intimidating numbers facing you when you go to, whether it's the sale barn or whatever. So I do think, and I don't have a lot of personal experience with them yet, just because I haven't really gone through the land buying process, but there are so many programs, whether, like I know the state of Missouri has some, I'm sure other states have some similar, USDA, FSA, and those can really, I think, bolster financial adequacy whenever it comes to buying farm or ranch. And some of them are specific to land. Some of them are specific to livestock. Some of them are specific to equipment. And so I really encourage people to do their research, get a good loan officer, a good banker, and make sure that you're having conversations with them to make sure that you're really making the most of your resources. And I think obviously those don't make the process easy by any means, but they could certainly help. And I think, again, that's kind of the continuity of the industry is why some of those generational gaps are so important to be closed, because, and sometimes it's the case of maybe your kids don't want anything to do with the ranch, and they're allowed to not want anything to do with the ranch. But are you going to, sell it off in parcels? Are you going to find a local person that really does want to get into the industry, or someone who's already into the industry looking for a place of their own? And, no judgment to anyone who does any number of those things, or, maybe it does get developed. That's totally whatever they want to do, what's right for their family. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we as an industry, and we as people who currently own land and are trying to buy land, or are making the tough decisions that keep either it's our family or the people who want to get into it or continue being into it engaged in agriculture and able to own land and to have livestock and to provide a food supply.
Yeah, it's such an important thing that's happening in our industry right now with the farmland and the next generation trying to take over. And I don't know if people who, don't look at the statistics and stuff as often recognize how big of a deal it is. Like some of the opportunities that have been around since the United States was founded are disappearing. Like they will never be an opportunity for someone again. And that's just, it's sad to think about, but it's also like, we've got to figure out as things evolve, is this what we want it to look like? Because if it's not, now is the time to be speaking up and saying something.
Yeah, I think it's important too there to engage with people who are making those decisions. So whether that's city council or your state legislators or, DC, your folks in DC. I mean, there's a tiny town really close to where I am, and there's a few, I don't know, it might be 150 acres. And we knew some folks that had cattle out there. Well, whenever they moved cattle, there apparently was, I don't know if it was a city ordinance or what it was, but there was a clause saying that once livestock was removed from that property, they legally could never go back on that property. And now it's a neighborhood. And so it's just stuff like that where, we have to engage with the people who are making decisions for our land, because they sometimes get to call the shots, and we don't always like it, but we do always have to follow it. And so making sure that we're having those important conversations and making sure they understand the repercussions of their decisions is also an important responsibility. Again, that maybe we didn't sign up for, but it's ours now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just cattle or livestock even that face it. A lot of specialty crops producers are expanding in Kansas, and they do much better when they are near, urban areas for that clientele to buy their produce fresh. But they often face those local governments saying, well, you can't do that here. You can't do that on this land, even though it's yours. You can't do that here. It's such a challenge, and it's sad to me that has to be part of a farmer's job, but I guess that's where we're at today.
Yeah.
So like it or not, that's how it is. Well, I want to just say thank you for all of the information that you've shared with folks. I think you've given great perspective and great advice. I kind of wanted to wrap up today by just letting you share what is an experience that you have found really rewarding as you guys have started on this venture and grown it to what it is now.
That's a good question. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm glad, again, that this finally happened, and I appreciate you you're reaching out. And yeah, I think, I use this word maybe too often, but community is so important to me. And in terms of, my faith, whether it's my church community and my family members and my friends and my physical neighbors and my coworkers, and in agriculture, we have such a strong community. And there are so many people in this community already that are trying to get more engaged. And there's so many people who are looking into the community from the outside and want in. And I think something that's been super rewarding in this process has been just really opening the doors of our ranch, essentially, sometimes literally having visitors or just having conversations with, people at the meat counter or whatever that looks like, and kind of either giving them a window in or welcoming them directly into the community. And I think, there's this kind of perspective of like producers versus consumers and like who's right, who's wrong. And at the end of the day, like we all want the same thing. We all want healthy food on our plates and on our families' plates, and a safe and healthy environment, happy animals, and all of these things. And so, yeah, I just think opening ourselves up to having conversations and to welcoming people versus feeling protective over what we have. Obviously, we're super proud of what we have as farmers and ranchers, and we should be, but why not share it if you're proud of it? So that's my thought.
Yeah, I love that. Becoming an industry with open doors and just showing that more. I think that's perfect. Well, Macey, where can folks follow up with you, learn more, and catch up on what's going on with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials, mainly Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and I'm just at Macey.Hurst or Macey Hurst on all the rest of them. And yeah, love to connect.
If you've enjoyed spending time with us today, please take a moment to review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or join the conversation on social media. Do you have a topic you would like to discuss or know someone with a story to share? Apply to be a guest on the podcast at farmingonpurpose.com. You can follow the host of Farming on Purpose, Lexi, on your favorite social media platforms for more content by searching for Farming on Purpose. And remember, if you look around your table and aren't inspired by the people there, it's time to find a new seat.